Okay, and we're back with chapter 6, and we're talking about society and the environment. And now, the third view of the environment, which is what we live with today in our society, in the United States and many countries, is the idea of managed space. And with an urban industrial society, you begin to see this idea that man must control nature, right? So, a great example is Chicago. Chicago, before Europeans came here, was a swamp. The word Chicago, if you don't know Chicago history, is a French version of a Native American word for stinky swamp onions, chicagawas. So this was a marshy, swampy area. It would flood every spring. It would be dry and full of mosquitoes in the summer. Not like what we see today. We have taken nature and we have used our technology to change it. The Chicago River was engineered to flow opposite its natural direction in 1901. We have built sewers to take away the water, and we've basically used our technology to elevate our city out of the swamp. Okay, and this is something that we see all throughout nature. As societies begin to industrialize, they control nature. Nature is seen as something to be managed, much like a factory. In the 1800s, there is kind of this backlash. It's called Romanticism. And the idea was that, yes, scientific rationalism allows you to understand and manage nature, but maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe there is something inherently that should be unmanaged, something that's almost, in a sense, spiritual. Romanticism. One of the earliest proponents of this, and by many considered the father of the American environmental movement, is Henry David Thoreau. He was a U.S. Gentleman. In the 1840s, he moved out of the city of Boston to a cabin out in the woods, which was called, now today, Thoreau Woods, and lived next to a pond. And all he did, he said he wanted to live life as close as to nature as possible. He wanted to suck the marrow from the bone of life. He wanted to experience life in the most natural setting he could. And he lived very simply. He ate what he grew. He walked through the forest. He took notes. And this whole idea of being closer to nature and kind of penetrating that managed space begins with this. Okay, this also eventually leads to the idea, the science of ecology. And ecology took what biologists study. Biology studies life. Ecology studies not only life, but how life links with other life and how life links with the space around it. So ecology begins with this. And this all begins to lead to this idea of environmental awareness. In other words, we can manage the environment for human benefit, and we do that quite well, but we have to be aware that the environment is more than just a human's environment. And this also leads to the idea of the environmental Kuznets curve. We're going to see this idea of the Kuznets curve and a couple other things later on in the book. But the Kuznets curve is simply this. If you look at a society over time, as income rises, as the society becomes wealthier, environmental degradation increases. We take more from the environment. At a certain point, at this some turning point, income continues to rise. The society continues to become wealthier, but now environmental awareness kicks in, and people begin to see this as more than just taking from the earth what the earth can give us, and being aware that an environmental degradation begins to improve. So think back to the Clean Air Act of 1970, right? As the United States became an industrial power in the 1800s and the 1900s, more and more factories, more and more smokestacks, more and more pollution, and more degradation. But at a certain point, it became valuable to have clean air. And so we found ways with our technology to make the air and the water cleaner. Cars burn less gas, they put off less pollution. We now have very strict laws about where our sewage goes. And so our income as a country has continued to rise, but the amount of degradation on our environment is hopefully decreasing. And this happens not just in the United States, this tends to be a pattern that we can observe in many societies. Okay. In fact, if you take this to the far extreme, there are these people that are deep ecologists who basically say that humans are nothing more than a virus on the earth, and that the earth will shed us like a dog sheds fleas. Um, at a certain point, the destruction of the environment will be so much that we will destroy ourselves. The earth will go on. Some argue that maybe we should even work towards this. That's kind of the far, far end of this curve, right? But it is a curve. But that does also have space for new debates on how we view the environment. And a great example is ecofeminism. So ecofeminism, here's a great example. In the 1940s, outside of Buffalo, New York, there was this area out in the woods that was an old canal, hadn't been used in 100 years, like a big old ditch, and local factories decided to bury their toxic waste. They buried it there, covered it up, forgetting about it, just toss it, dump it, put it away. 1960s, 1970s, as the city was growing, that area became a small neighborhood with houses and schools because it was as developed. And over time, local mothers began to notice that their children would get these weird cuts in their legs that would not heal, or they would get sicker more often than most. And one mother noticed that there were more people who had cancer as children, more diseases in this neighborhood that was normal. And this lady went around and she organized all the mothers to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because by themselves, they had sick children, and doctors say, well, kids get sick. But she was able to get them to work together and discover that this neighborhood they lived in was built on an undisclosed toxic dump. And why is that ecofeminism? Well, because it was observed through the eyes of people who were raising children, which in our country still tends to be a gendered role. Wives and mothers raise children more than men, especially in the 50s and 60s. So they connected that role to their role with the environment. In a lot of countries in Africa, the idea of clean water and working public sewers is something that is pursued by women, as women are usually traditionally the ones who are responsible for providing the family with food and water, going down to the river to get water, and they are the first to encounter environmental aspects like that. So again, adding the lens of gender to the lens of environmental viewpoints is ecofeminism. Now, it's hard not to underestimate how your environment impacts you. So I'm going to just show you this. When you look at these pictures, obviously they're restaurants, but how do you feel? And one of the things you might feel is hungry. Red, not only do you know the name, McDonald's, but colors like red and orange have been shown to stimulate hunger. But I'll ask you this, when you look at all these places, and I say close your eyes, you now are thinking about McDonald's or KFC or Wendy's, and answer these questions to yourself. Hard or soft? Loud or quiet? Quick or slow? And you're going to have some definite responses. I'm betting most of you said hard versus soft, loud versus quiet, and quick versus fast. And that is on purpose. McDonald's does not make money from you once you buy the food. Once you buy the food, they're done with you. They want you out the door so that the next person come in and buy you food. If you sit there in their dining room for 1 hour eating your hamburger and french fries, and the dining room is full, somebody else might not come in. So places like McDonald's and Pizza Hut and Hardee's and Domino's, they want you to buy your food, get in, get out. So the benches that you sit on are hard. They're not comfortable. They don't want you to lounge. It's loud. They play loud music. They place echoes with tile on everyone's feet. They don't want you to be comfortable and sit around, right? They want you to be fast. It's called fast food for a reason. Compare that to this. If I say Starbucks, what color do you think of when I say Starbucks? Most of you probably said green. Starbucks, loud or quiet? Most people are probably going to say quiet. Soft or loud? And again, I'm betting many of you are saying quiet. Starbucks goes for a whole different viewpoint. They want you to come in. They want you to linger in the store. Because if you buy coffee, that's one thing. But if you hang around the store and you drink coffee and you linger, you might buy a sweet. You might buy a sweet roll or a donut or something else. Maybe you're going to buy a coffee cup for a gift. So they encourage you to linger, right? If you go to a really, really expensive restaurant where you have the full meal, usually you have very subdued, dim lighting to make you relaxed. So they study these things. And this just is an example that space has encoded behaviors. If you are sitting in the doctor's office, are you going to be talking to your friend in a normal voice? Or will you kind of talk a little quiet? Will you be very subdued and sit on your bench? Or do you walk around looking at the walls? Where you are affects you. I ask this question in class and everyone laughs every time. When you walk into an elevator, do you make eye contact with the people in the elevator next to you? Or do you just kind of stare up at the numbers and maybe kind of quietly go like this? right? What would happen if someone walked into the elevator and walked up next to you and went, you'd be like, whoa, wait, back off, buddy. Elevators have certain rules. Would you wear the same clothes to the beach that you wear to go see your grandmother? Unless your grandma's really cool, who knows? What I'm getting at here is that space around us has behaviors that are encoded. They're not written out. There is no rule book that I know of on how to act in the elevator. Check one, check two, but we all kind of know. These are things that are encoded. How we act in public versus private is much different, right? How you act in a church or a synagogue, how you act in the library, right? Versus the beach. And for the most part, these rules aren't written out. They're kind of culturally encoded. We see, we observe, we learn. It's one of the reasons why children kind of stand out, right? Because young children don't know these rules. And so at a church, they're allowed to be a little bit louder until they learn better. Act your age, right? Another thing is the bystander effect. We are affected by the people either that are around us or not around us. So there's actually been studies that where if there is a crime being committed in view of other people and no one moves, it makes it even harder for anyone else to jump in. It's almost like you need someone else to make that first move. Think about class. When we have class face to face, the first week of class, no one talks. It's not until someone raises their hand and starts talking that more and more people talk. We are very conscious of our bystanders. Daycares and childcares use this. A lot of children will not do things at home they do in school, and because of what everyone else is doing. Everyone else is in line quietly. I'm going to be in line quietly too. Think about where you work, how you relate to your coworkers. Some buildings that are designed for certain industries design offices to be open. Companies that work with computer programming, like Google or Apple, have these huge floors of offices with no walls between them. They want people to interact because that drives creativity. But if you go to, say, an accounting firm or a lawyer's office, individual walls. You want people to work individually. This last one you really can't read, but I'll point here. It says green space can improve physical and mental health. How many of you have been told many times to go outside and play? Now, one, you were probably annoying your parents, but two, there have been many studies that show that even if you aren't necessarily being the most active, if you are outside in an environment with green plants, your blood pressure will lower, your breathing rate calms down. It definitely has beneficial effects. I mean, obviously, people who go camping or hiking have it even more so. But this is why we have parks. Just this idea of green space for people to go to. A lot of times, if you go to a building and a lobby or a waiting room, they'll have plants in the waiting room to kind of help you calm down and relax. So we're going to leave this right here and come back with part 3 in just a moment.